Alright, so my name's Ryan Phillip, as you all may know. I'm sorry for the lack of content. I have more time for once. I will upload more. Um, but while this video itself is slightly unnecessary because it very much suits some subjects I've already covered, however, I do need to explain this because some people just don't understand. Even if they're not watching my channel, I do think it is quite important to really emphasize this because it shows parts of just generally puts a great example for certain suspects that might happen in the future or whether or not. And I do think some people might very much disagree with this. I do think it is valid. And this is why I want to put up this video to emphasize on that importance. So first of all, the first thing I need to cover, as you all might or may or may not know, Diglett got another suspect. This is the second. Oh yeah, this has to do with the argument I made with someone else. If I did show it, it'd literally be just me reacting to a troll, and it's not worth reacting to that. Oh well. This is also why I did not give reasoning, because it was kind of obvious, and I'm actually a bit stupid that I asked you quotes to give reasoning, even though he should not have given reasoning at all, on why I was removed, and it has every reason to. I didn't flame or anything. It's just I'm not gonna show it. It's unnecessary. For one, Sam Testing actually put a very nice description. If I did go to this, you basically have the 3 reasons for a poke to be banned. These are the 3 main rules, and it's basically gonna be these 3 that are gonna be the main reasons a poke is going to be banned. Sometimes it might be a specific ban, for example, say Shadow Tag. Those are specific bans, and it's not really just like a unnecessary specific ban, but something along those lines. What did I want to say? Oh yeah. Basically, these 3 things. First of all, and this was very important, the first suspect, and I'm not talking about the fledgling suspect, I'm talking about this specific suspect of Diglett and Gotita. Diglett in that got suspected for its, I might actually just go back and go to this post. The argument that Diglett is broken regardless of how it performs in a given matchup, because either way it does its job strikes me as odd. Diglett is broke. Just this argument, Diglett is broke. This was the main argument. Diglett was an offensive characteristic Pokemon in that regard. If you refer to something... Okay, that was actually a very bad example, because there was another post that very specifically said it was overpowered. And that's actually a funny part, because it's... If, say, it did not have that ability, it did notably be less effective. Like, really notably less effective. It would still have somewhat of niche as Scarf Drillbur. You can argue with that. Because it somewhat lacks power in some regards. But still. And this is actually a very important point, because it really emphasizes on the fact that this was one of the arguments used to not ban Diglett, because it didn't suit this main characteristic. But the argument that I always kept emphasizing on was its support characteristic. And that's actually a funny thing, because even right now I just say Diglett still has not found its most optimal partner. That might sound like a joke, but there yet has to be a poke that is so overpoweredly effective if combined with Diglett. There yet has to be such a poke. And there can be such a poke. And that's the thing. But we don't have it yet. But we have something that really shaked up what I intended, or already saw coming because it must have happened at one point. Diglett, as I said, Diglett will find new partners that will be stronger than the previous one. Fletchdig was a great combo. Drifloondig is extremely good. It works in a very disruptive way. One poke is a stall poke, the other one is a trapper, an offensive trapper even. So it shouldn't really do much together, you would say, except for the fact that if Diglett removes those specific things, the other can stall out everything else. This characterizes Drifloon, and it's because Diglett was the poke that actually caused the metagame. Drifloon caused the poke the metagame to shift. People were thinking, it'd be ridiculous if we did suspect Drifloon, because that would very, very easily get people angry, because it would directly support this previous reasoning on why it was even suspected the second time, which is just combinations. It's mostly its support that is really emphasizable. But basically, Pokemon like Fletchling got suspect in the Missy era, which is a different era, but still it did emphasize such a similar situation. You did have a different poke that, as only thing that really made it broke to, or even suspect worthy to begin with, was the fact that Diglett was there. Only with Diglett it did beat those Pokemon and had very, very few answers, and this is why it got suspect in the first place. But as we all know, Fletchling is not broke. It really has good answers. And the same counts for Drifloon, even though it's smaller. I did actually argue, if you did take the amount of Pokemon, then yeah, it is better. It is better. But it's not like it doesn't have answers. In fact, even, how's it called again? Lorvesta could arguably deal with the physical Drifloon set, as it actually survives with the bulky set. 2 acrobatics, without berry juice, from its very weak attack. And because of that, it can actually switch in, spam Morning Sun until it gets burned because of Flame Body, and it did just not give a shit. If it did put up Substitute, it would still just spam Morning Sun, because it just does not give a shit. Why? Because it just wants it burned. And there is nothing Drifloon can do, because the only thing Larvesta needs to do is just click Will-O-Wisp if it really needs to stall. But that's also out of the picture, because then I didn't need to get into other subjects, and that's really a bad example to put up in the first place. But other things like Ponyta, Chinchu, all those kind of stuff can effectively deal with Drifloon. Depending on the stats as well. It is a good poke. There have always been good pokes, and if more pursuit trappers did be more active, as well as some more other pokes generally more used, then sure, the metagame will shift even more in favor of some things against Drifloon. And banning Diglett did literally open a world in sense of you bring back the so-called balanced metagame that the metagame once was. Before people really started abusing, there was a very big increase in people using Chinju, using Arcan at that time, those kind of Pokemon. Really, really many people, also Ponyta or Vesta, those kind of stuff. One of the biggest teams I can put in this example is, not Jetpack's team, but Infamy's, I think. Infamy, I think, made that team. Might be wrong, but it was something along those lines. So I really want to remind people of that team, because it still exists in the now locked sample thread, and it really puts just a great example of one of the better teams in that regard for that metagame at that point. It was a very balanced metagame. It literally defined balance with Volturn, and more Volturn. But there were other playstyles very viable in that regard. And Diglett is one of the most limiting pokes in such a perspective. Limiting pokes like Trubbish. Not that Trubbish would be so much better with or without Diglett, but it really puts a note on such a poke with so much potential. And it's that potential that completely gets limited. Not that Gatita or just any psychic type did completely ruin its day, but you get what I mean. as well as Natu. But something I want people to understand is the fact that it gets suspected for its support. The thing was meant to be suspected for in the first place, in my opinion. And it's because of other things that are put in this metagame, people are now actually starting to change their mind. And I'm very happy about that. But I think it is a bit too late. In senses of, I think some people may or may not actually choose to still want Diglett to stay because of. I'm sorry if you take this personal, and I did really just spread hate if I did name people by their names for what of their arguments are. Arguments like, there is no other way to deal with Ponyta. Ponyta will be broke. Larvesta will be broke. Let me emphasize on that last part. Actually, all those three are just what? Like, Ponyta will be broke. What? U-turn will be. I'm sorry. The metagame will be more luck-based. That's just ridiculous because the metagame has always been luck-based. This is Pokemon. Don't expect metagame to not be luck-based. We try to limit the metagame to be more fun as well as more competitively oriented. If we keep Diglett, you did limit creativity. And that's a different perspective. So, what was I going to say again? Oh yeah. Things like Larvesta can just come in without cost. This is a quote, by the way. Larvesta can come in without risk on a U-turn and punish someone for it. This is mostly oriented against Meanfu, if you didn't notice. And the fact that it's just the argument that people suggest, oh yeah, U-turn now has somewhat of a punishing thing, so it must be banned. Ignore how Meanfu gets Stone Edge to deal with specifically Larvesta, even with the defensive set. And second of all, Stone Edge with just Stealth Rocks up can already deal with Ponyta, if I remember correctly. And it's bullshit like that. It's just. Ooh, static. I really need to get better with my headphone. Meanfu, this set, Stone Edge. This is the defensive set, does not get. Okay, so it was actually the offensive set, I'm sorry. The offensive set does not necessarily run this, I'm actually more oriented towards this specific one. Because it is getting more and more of a reasonable thing to run just this, because really just there is reasoning, believe me, it's called Porygon. It's as literal as that. Odd roll. Weird. I do know that Larvesta just dies from just this, without even Stealth Rocks. Dies. If I remember correctly, with a defensive set, bulky, and then Stone Edge. Kills, yeah. Now, I'm sorry, I got a little bit distracted. Anyway, as I was saying, it is basically these 2 points for once that are being pulled up as main reasoning. Now, a lot of these people have actually very highly argued on these kind of posts, and it's. Yes, I actually went with this group of people that like this because reason why. It's correct. It's just correct. It's funny because this guy actually was considered a joke for a moment, and he brought up some interesting arguments that were a bit over the top, as well as extremely showing its opinion. But I do need to realize he is correct. He thinks like this. He completely argues on why, even if Diglett does not really do something against that opponent's team, that means you're facing a team that Diglett can't do anything against. And when can Diglett not do anything against that team? When everything is counteracted against Diglett. And that's when the fun part comes in, because you have teammates with Diglett. And those teammates now just plain don't have anything, any counters to face at all. Meaning those things can just plain go all the way because there is just nothing to stop it because it's too afraid to be trapped by Diglett. And that's the fun part because very often it just has that option straight off the bat of the start of the battle. Before you even know what sets the pokes run. For example, Scarf Chinchu. Okay, then you can realize, okay, he does have an answer because he prepared for Diglett in such a way to still have an answer. Except if your team orients around completely answering Diglett, you're gonna miss out on some spots. And it's really just not a fucking joke because it's literal. You are going to miss out if you're gonna make such an unhealthy team. Some things just are weak against Diglett, and those work very well in the metagame. For example, just Berryjuice Chinchu. It's as literal as that. And I'm feeling very sorry for people to not realize the fact that these, even though they're extreme, I'm very much gonna argue on why this is extreme, but I mean, just that alone should argue why it's extreme. But um, I'm sorry. For once, there are very interesting. Yeah, he literally notes. He literally notes most of the things that I would already name in this situation. So I don't see any reason to just plain repeat other stuff that he has actually said right in here, which completely agrees with my opinion. Some regard. His sometimes it's quite how do we refer to this? Extreme in situations, so I wouldn't necessarily agree with those, but some are indeed correct, and I don't see any reason to just ignore that. Um, these kind of arguments, they are good, but they tend to some edges in sense of they tend to be extreme. I'm not saying my arguments are not extreme in absolute complete disgusting opposite, because I even argued this is not even the final form Diglett can find a partner in, and that's where the joke really comes in, because yeah, these are also arguments. As well as Madoka, the LC champion. By the way, congrats on your final win, on another win, I should say, in the SPL. She did great, even against Haysub, and did get a bit of hacks to actually get there, but Haysub really outplayed her. You played well regardless, even if you got outplayed. Where's my post? Yeah, here. Diglett has been taking a good amount of attention when team building since the Missy era left, really. Oh yeah, this is based on our argument of this guy, I think. No. Yeah, this guy. He really just he uses very wrong terminology. He suggests everything is a trick, and that's just something that's like saying it's a gimmick. Because referring to something like a trick is plain just referring to it as a gimmick. It's not literal, but it is like you are suggesting it is. And comparing it to Duck Trio and Ario, even though I've already put up some small points, just comparing Ario to LCS Poor, while Duck Trio has similar use and utility, it can end up being used. That's actually completely out of context. I should remove that because that's completely irrelevant. I'm sorry, this is irrelevant. This is irrelevant. That's also another argument that's unnecessary. Where should I go? I think I actually, yeah, this was one of the first one that I actually put up. This I dislike counter arguments, opinions, and that's actually very true because I dislike someone says something, you try to correct him on either his mistakes or his argumentation, and that's just no. What's the point in doing that? Really, just what's the point? Because you're basically gonna end up with an argument that is one-sided, and the other one is going to end up with an argument that's one-sided, so you're basically going to have two different sides, different poles that just never meet. So it has no point. Yeah, and this I actually put up the main arguments where it's just some people suggesting Larvesta can just switch in. Also suggesting other things that even if Diglett gets banned, it doesn't mean some pokes will playing go better. But it does mean some Pokemon will get somewhat better. It doesn't mean it's gonna be B plus or suddenly in gigantically raising, but will be more notable, as it will have less effective answers to deal with it, and it will support other Pokemon as well. I'm mostly looking at things like Stunky, which frankly will become one of the, well, not, that's actually very wrong. It will be notably better than it was before. I did even argue it to be B plus material for once, because it's actually B right now. I did actually argue it to be less than B valid right now, but assume Diglett did get banned, it would go up. And I'm very sure of that because it is still able to do its job. Memento. It needs to be an N. Me and my damn typo, seriously. There is no point in just naming all these posts. You should read up on them. I might actually just post these right in the thingy subscription. Yeah. But something I just want people to be very clear of. This suspect has use. It is to resuspect Diglett and his idea of you have a core and you have Diglett. Diglett can change anything in any part of any core, because it just works well with about anything. And it is that support role that got it to the suspect. It's extreme examples, such as Shell Dig, Drift Dig, Fledge Dig, Flying Spam, plus Dig, those kind of stuff. And it's also God Dig, Gotita plus Diglett. It is the fact that these kind of cores just work so well with just Diglett. It's like, oh, you're lazy at team building, oh, you're fire weak, smack on a Diglett. That mostly works only if you have momentum, or volt switch, or U-turn momentum kind of stuff. But about any team has that, because Meanfo is such a common poke and so effective right now. I see no reason not to use Meanfo, except if you just want to use something else, which I effectively try to do. Once again, I never really, and that's actually a fun thing, I never really liked Meanfo. I am fully aware of its goodness, and I basically put in about all my teams, but I honestly really like it. I prefer Timber. Even if it's less effective, I prefer Timber, especially in the current metagame. I did actually argue it to be less than A material. Less than A plus material. Let me correct me on that. Some argued it to be S rank material. Can't see it being that, mostly because it needs a lot of support. As well as some things just plain stopping it, even if it sets up. I'm looking at some fairy types, I'm looking at just some offensive freaking psychic types. Things like, well, frankly, any psychic type in that regard that can one-hit KO Timber is able to just win against Timber. There's no point in arguing about that. But also outside of the subject, once again, damn, I really drift out of my subjects. If you did not get irritated enough from what I've been saying right now, as well as the light changing a bit dark outside. Might put them with lights to be helpful. Now, as I was saying, I will be uploading more content. For once, I am sure of doing that. I have time, and that's the most important part. I have time and motivation.